Your brother deserves it, Dad said. They gave him the house, the cash, the company. A month later, Mom texted, "Mortgage is due." I replied, "Ask your heir." I'm Megan, 32, and last month my phone lit up with a text from my mother. Mortgage is due. 3 years ago, my parents handed their multi-million-dollar construction company, family home, and investment accounts to my younger brother Ryan, saying he deserved it all. I spent 15 years helping build our family business while Ryan partied through his 20s. When Dad told me I was getting nothing, his exact words were, "Your brother deserves it." Now they're drowning in debt. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join my journey of standing up for myself. Growing up in our sprawling colonial home in the suburbs of Boston, I always felt like I was living in Ryan's shadow. Our family story began with my grandfather, William Patterson, who started Patterson Construction from his garage in 1965. With nothing but determination and a pickup truck, he built it into a respectable local business. When my father Thomas took over in the early 1990s, he expanded it into a regional powerhouse with contracts across New England. I was 7 when Ryan was born. I remember my father's face lighting up in the hospital waiting room when the nurse announced, "It's a boy." That moment set the tone for the next 25 years of family dynamics. Finally, a Patterson to carry on the family name, Dad declared, as if I hadn't existed for the previous 7 years. From the beginning, the difference in how we were treated was subtle but unmistakable. For Ryan's 5th birthday, he received a custom playhouse that Dad had the company crew build in our backyard. For my 12th birthday that same year, I got a cake and a bookstore gift card. When I brought home straight A's on my report card, Mom would say, "That's nice, honey," before turning her attention back to Ryan's C in math, praising him for improving. My mother Nancy wasn't openly biased, but she enabled my father's favoritism. She was the peacekeeper, always trying to smooth things over with extra attention when Dad wasn't looking. "Your father just has traditional values," she'd whisper after particularly painful instances of favoritism. "He doesn't mean anything by it." By the time I reached high school, I had developed a strategy: excellence. If I couldn't win their affection through existence, perhaps achievement would do the trick. I joined every business-related club, became president of the Future Business Leaders of America chapter, and graduated as salutatorian. Meanwhile, Ryan barely maintained AC average, spending more time at attention than in extracurricular activities. During my sophomore year, I overheard Dad talking with Ryan after he'd been caught drinking at a school dance. "Boys will be boys," Dad said with a laugh. "Just don't get caught next time." 3 months earlier, I'd been grounded for a week for missing curfew by 15 minutes after staying late at a study group. When it came time for college decisions, I specifically chose to major in business management with a focus on construction management, not because it was my passion, but because I thought it would finally earn my father's respect. I wanted to show him I was serious about the family business. Ryan, on the other hand, bounced between 3 different majors before settling on communications because it was easy. The summer before my senior year of college, I interned at Patterson Construction. I arrived early, stayed late, and absorbed everything I could about estimating, project management, and client relations. Dad barely acknowledged my presence, assigning me to file paperwork while Ryan, home from his sophomore year, was invited to client meetings and job sites. "Ryan needs to learn the business from the ground up," Dad explained, when I questioned why my brother was attending executive meetings while I organized the supply closet. The irony was completely lost on him. Despite everything, I loved our family business. I saw its potential and genuinely wanted to be part of its future. Every summer and holiday break, I worked different positions throughout the company. I learned the names of every employee from the accounting department to the construction crews. I understood their concerns, their processes, and their ideas for improvement. Christmas of my senior year in college, I presented my father with a detailed business plan for expanding Patterson Construction into green building practices. I'd spent months researching industry trends, tax incentives, and potential new client bases. He glanced at the cover, said, "We'll see," and set it aside. Later that night, he spent 2 hours in the den with Ryan, teaching him how to read blueprints even though Ryan showed no interest or aptitude. Mom tried to comfort me afterward. "Your father just connects better with Ryan," she said, patting my hand. "He doesn't know how to relate to a daughter in business." I pointed out that several major construction companies in our area were run by women. She just shrugged and changed the subject. By the time I graduated, I had accepted that I would never be the favorite, but I was determined to prove my worth through results. I believed that actions spoke louder than words, and eventually, my contributions would be undeniable. Looking back now, I recognize the naivety in that hope. No amount of excellence can overcome entrenched favoritism, especially when it's reinforced by traditional gender expectations. Despite everything, I never gave up. Maybe that was my greatest strength or my biggest weakness. I refused to walk away from a family and a business that I loved, even when every sign pointed to the fact that my place in both would always be secondary to my brother's. I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout college to pay for my expenses. Meanwhile, Ryan received a full ride from the bank of mom and dad, complete with a luxury apartment and a new car every 2 years. My parents covered his tuition, rent, meal plan, and gave him a generous monthly allowance that exceeded what many graduates make in their first jobs. When I asked my parents why they wouldn't help me financially, Dad said, "You need to learn the value of hard work." As if Ryan didn't. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business administration and construction management. Ryan barely scraped by with a 2.3 gigapascals in communications after 5.5 years. At my graduation dinner, Dad raised a toast to Megan, who always does things by the book. At Ryan's graduation 6 months later, he wept openly. "To my son, who will carry the Patterson name into the future of our business." When I officially joined Patterson Construction after graduation, I was placed in an entry-level estimating position despite my qualifications. My starting salary was lower than recent hires with less education. "You need to understand every aspect of the business from the ground up," Dad explained. 3 weeks later, Ryan was installed in a newly created Vice President of Client Relations role, complete with a corner office and company car. During my first year, I identified nearly $400,000 in potential savings through more efficient material ordering processes. I created a spreadsheet tracking historical pricing from various suppliers and identified patterns that allowed us to negotiate better rates. When I presented my findings in a management meeting, Dad nodded and said, "Interesting," before moving on to Ryan's presentation about hosting a company golf tournament. Despite the constant disappointment, I continued to excel. I became known among the project managers as the person who could solve problems. When material shipments were delayed, I found alternatives. When subcontractors failed to show, I had backups ready to call. I built relationships with everyone from the receptionist to the lead foreman on our biggest projects. One particular project stands out in my memory. We were building a medical office complex with a tight deadline and substantial penalties for late completion. 2 months into construction, our project manager quit unexpectedly. Ryan was supposed to step in, but he was on a 3-week European vacation with friends. Dad was in a panic until I volunteered to take over. I worked 14-hour days for 6 weeks straight. I renegotiated with subcontractors, reorganized the construction schedule to optimize crew time, and personally supervised critical phases of the project. We completed the building 2 days ahead of schedule and under budget. The client was so impressed they immediately contracted us for their next expansion. At the completion ceremony, I stood in the background while Dad and Ryan, who had returned just in time, cut the ribbon. The client's CEO specifically asked for me, shook my hand, and said, "This wouldn't have happened without you." Dad overheard and looked momentarily uncomfortable before clapping Ryan on the shoulder and saying, "The Patterson men know how to deliver." Meanwhile, I lived modestly in a small 1-bedroom apartment, while Ryan purchased a waterfront condo using his executive compensation package. I brought lunch from home and drove a 10-year-old Honda, while Ryan expense accounted client lunches and drove a company-leased BMW. I built my savings account while Ryan accumulated credit card debt that my parents periodically paid off. The company continued to grow, largely due to the systems and client relationships I developed. I created a new division focusing on sustainable construction that attracted prestigious clients concerned about environmental impact. These projects carried higher profit margins and built our reputation as an innovative firm. Dad took credit for the initiative in industry publications, despite having initially dismissed my proposal. Ryan's contributions were less tangible. He was the face at charity galas and golf tournaments. He charmed the wives of clients at holiday parties. He was photogenic in company marketing materials. When he did manage projects, they typically ran over budget and behind schedule, requiring other managers, usually me, to step in and salvage them. During my 5th year with the company, we faced a major crisis. A significant commercial project was on the verge of collapse after Ryan approved design changes without calculating the structural implications. The client was threatening legal action, and our reputation was at stake. Ryan was conveniently sick the week this all came to light. I spent 2 weeks negotiating with architects, engineers, and the client to find a solution. I secured additional financing, brought in specialized subcontractors, and personally supervised the remediation work. The project was saved, albeit with reduced profit. When the dust settled, Dad called me into his office. For a moment, I thought recognition was finally coming. "You've done good work cleaning up the situation," he said. "But in the future, consult with me before making financial commitments of this magnitude. Ryan made a mistake, but he's learning. We need to support him while he grows into his role." I sat there, stunned into silence. 10 years of dedication, and I was still being treated as subordinate to my brother who couldn't be bothered to show up when things got difficult. That night, I seriously considered leaving the company for the first time, but I'd invested so much of myself in Patterson Construction that walking away felt like admitting defeat. Besides, where would I go? This was the family business. My business too. Or so I thought. The evening that changed everything began normally enough. Mom invited Ryan and me to Sunday dinner, saying Dad had an important announcement. I assumed it was about the new office building we were planning, or perhaps the expansion into the commercial real estate market I'd been researching. I arrived 15 minutes early as usual, bringing a bottle of Dad's favorite scotch. The house I grew up in looked the same as always, immaculately maintained 4-bedroom colonial with the Patterson Construction sign proudly displayed near the driveway. 25 years of business success had allowed my parents to add a sunroom, swimming pool, and extensive landscaping to the property I still thought of as home. Ryan arrived 20 minutes late, offering no apology. Mom fussed over him as if he'd returned from war rather than the short drive from his condo. Dad beamed with pride when Ryan mentioned he'd just put a deposit down on a boat. No one asked about my recent successful negotiation of a contract that would secure work for the company for the next 3 years. During dinner, Dad cleared his throat and raised his glass. "I've been thinking about the future of Patterson Construction," he began. "I'm not getting any younger, and it's time to plan for succession." My heart quickened. This was the moment I'd been working toward. After 15 years of dedication, surely Dad recognized my contributions and commitment. "Your mother and I have decided it's time to start stepping back from day-to-day operations," he continued. "We want to travel, enjoy our golden years, and watch the business continue to thrive under new leadership." I sat up straighter, mentally reviewing the transition plan I'd been quietly developing for years. "Therefore," Dad said, turning toward Ryan, "we've decided to transfer ownership of Patterson Construction to Ryan, effective immediately." The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table. Additionally, Dad continued as if he hadn't just shattered my world. "We'll be transferring the house and our investment accounts to Ryan as well. He'll need these assets to secure the company's future growth." "What about Megan?" Mom asked quietly, the first indication that perhaps this hadn't been a unanimous decision. Dad barely glanced my way. "We're offering Megan a generous severance package in recognition of her years with the company. 3 months' salary and her company car. That's it." I finally found my voice. 15 years of my life, and I get 3 months' pay while Ryan gets everything? "Your brother deserves it," Dad said firmly, his tone indicating the matter was settled. "He's a Patterson man. The company should stay with the family name." "I'm a Patterson too," I said, my voice shaking. "Until you marry," Dad replied dismissively. "Besides, Ryan has a vision for the company's future." Ryan smirked across the table. "Don't worry, sis. I might find a place for you in the new organization, maybe in HR or something." I looked at Mom, hoping for support, but she stared at her plate. "We just want what's best for the company," she murmured. "What's best for the company?" I stood up, knocking my chair backward. "Ryan doesn't know the first thing about running this business. He can't read a balance sheet, he's never completed a project on time, and half the crews refuse to work with him because he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's enough." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "This decision is final. The paperwork has already been prepared. Did you ever intend to include me in the company's future?" I asked, tears threatening. Dad's expression softened slightly. "Megan, you're smart. You'll land on your feet. But Patterson Construction needs a Patterson at the helm. It's tradition." "A male Patterson, you mean?" I said bitterly. "Don't make this about gender," Ryan interjected. "It's about who Dad trusts to carry on his legacy." I looked around the table at my family, Dad resolute in his decision, Mom unwilling to challenge him, Ryan barely containing his triumph. 32 years of trying to prove myself, of loving people who would never value me equally, crashed down around me. "Congratulations on your retirement," I said coldly to my parents. "And congratulations on your inheritance," I added to Ryan. "I hope you all get exactly what you deserve." I walked out without looking back, ignoring my mother's calls to return. In my car, I finally let the tears come, not just for the lost inheritance, but for the recognition I'd never receive, for the wasted years trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. The next morning, I submitted my resignation effective immediately. Dad called, not to apologize, but to remind me about the non-compete clause in my employment contract. "You can't work for any competitor within 100 miles for 2 years, he said, as if that was his primary concern. "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied before hanging up. I cleared out my office on a Sunday when no one would be there. 15 years of work fit into 2 cardboard boxes. As I took one last look at the company I'd helped build, I made myself a promise. I would never again allow my worth to be determined by someone else's inability to see it. The first month after leaving Patterson Construction was the hardest. I rented a furnished apartment in Chicago as far from Boston as I could reasonably go while still staying in the construction industry. Each morning, I woke up questioning my decision. Each night, I reminded myself that staying would have slowly destroyed my soul. I allowed myself 2 weeks to grieve. I cried, I screamed into pillows, I wrote scathing letters to my family that I never sent. Then I got to work rebuilding my life from scratch. The severance package barely covered my first month's rent and security deposit. I dipped into my savings to furnish my apartment minimally and set up my new business, Patterson Consulting. Keeping my name was a small act of defiance. I created a website, business cards, and a LinkedIn profile emphasizing my experience without mentioning it was family business. Cold calls and networking events became my daily routine. I introduced myself to everyone in the Chicago construction industry. From subcontractors to developers, most doors remained firmly closed. Construction consulting from an unknown woman in a male-dominated industry wasn't an easy sell. My first client came through pure desperation, theirs, not mine. A mid-sized developer had fired their project manager mid-construction and needed immediate help. The project was 3 months behind schedule and significantly over budget. I offered to work for a reduced fee with a bonus structure tied to getting the project back on track. For 6 weeks, I worked from 6 a.m. until midnight. I renegotiated with subcontractors, reorganized the construction schedule, and identified costly mistakes in the original plans. By the end, we had cut the delays in half and identified enough savings to offset the previous overruns. The developer was impressed enough to refer me to 2 colleagues. Suddenly, I had a small client base and positive references. I created a niche for myself, the construction consultant you call when things go wrong. I marketed myself as a problem solver rather than competing directly with established project management firms. 4 months into my new venture, I received a call from Martin Chin, Patterson Construction's former head estimator. "I quit," he announced without preamble. "Ryan fired Dolores and Jim last week, said they were too expensive after 30 years with the company. I couldn't stay after that." Martin filled me in on the changes Ryan had implemented. Experienced project managers replaced with his fraternity brothers. Reliable subcontractors dropped in favor of cheaper alternatives. The sustainable construction division I'd built was dismantled because Ryan thought it was too complicated. "The place is falling apart," Martin concluded. "Your father is trying to keep his hands off, but he looks physically ill every time he visits the office." I thanked Martin for the information but maintained my boundary. Their business was no longer my concern. Still, I couldn't help but feel validated by the news. It wasn't personal satisfaction I felt, but professional vindication. The skills and knowledge I'd brought to Patterson Construction had been valuable, whether my family recognized it or not. As my first year in Chicago progressed, so did my business. I hired 2 assistants and moved into a small but professional office space. I developed a reputation for honesty and results. Unlike my father, who believed in hierarchical management, I created collaborative relationships with clients. I explained my recommendations clearly and involved them in decisions rather than dictating terms. This approach resonated particularly well with female developers and project owners, a growing demographic in the industry. By my 15th month in Chicago, I had a waiting list of clients and was considering expanding my team. Meanwhile, updates from former colleagues painted an increasingly dire picture of Patterson Construction. Ryan had secured several large contracts by underbidding competitors, not realizing the projects would operate at a loss. Quality issues emerged as inexperienced managers failed to properly supervise subcontractors. 2 major clients had filed lawsuits over delays and defects. I maintained professional distance from these problems, but I couldn't help feeling a twinge of sadness. Patterson Construction had been my grandfather's legacy. Hundreds of families depended on the company for their livelihoods. Ryan's mismanagement wasn't just hurting our family. It was affecting innocent employees who had been loyal for decades. One evening I received an email from Barbara, my parents' neighbor for 20 years. She wrote that there were rumors about my parents experiencing financial difficulties. Their country club membership had lapsed, and they had canceled their annual vacation. The company trucks no longer had the Patterson logo prominently displayed. Instead, they were plain white, with minimal identification. I nearly called my mother that night, but stopped myself. They had made their choice. They had entrusted everything to Ryan, believing that sharing their DNA and gender made him more worthy than my years of demonstrated competence. Whatever consequences came from that decision were theirs to bear. Instead, I channeled my energy into growing my business. I expanded into preventative consulting, helping developers avoid the costly mistakes I'd seen repeatedly in troubled projects. I developed a training program for new project managers based on practical experience rather than textbook theories. I hired 3 more consultants, all women with extensive construction experience, who had faced similar barriers in traditional companies. By the end of my 2nd year in Chicago, Patterson Consulting had become a respected name in the Midwest construction industry. I had proven to myself that my success at Patterson Construction hadn't been a fluke or the result of nepotism. If anything, I had succeeded there despite the obstacles placed in my path. I bought a small but elegant condo in a historic building, my first real home that was truly mine. As I unpacked my belongings, I found a photo of my grandfather standing in front of his first Patterson Construction truck. His expression showed the same pride and determination I now felt. In that moment, I realized I was carrying on his true legacy, not through a name on a building, but through the values of hard work, integrity, and resilience he had embodied. That night, I slept better than I had in years, finally at peace with my new path. I had no idea that the next morning would bring my past crashing back into my carefully reconstructed life. Ryan's approach to running Patterson Construction could best be described as a toddler playing with blocks, knocking down established structures for the sheer pleasure of destruction, with no plan for rebuilding. Within the first 6 months of his leadership, he'd made changes that undid decades of careful business development. His first major decision was firing the company's long-standing accounting firm, replacing them with his college roommate's brother who had just received his CPA license. The new accountant, eager to please and inexperienced with construction industry specifics, failed to properly track job costs across multiple projects. By the time tax season arrived, the company's books were in such disarray that they had to hire a forensic accountant at tremendous expense. Ryan's next brilliant move was restructuring the management team. He eliminated the positions of 3 project managers who had been with the company for over 20 years, claiming they were resistant to fresh ideas. In their place, he hired 4 friends from his fraternity days, none of whom had construction experience. He created new executive titles like Chief Innovation Officer and Director of Brand Experience, complete with 6-figure salaries and company vehicles. The Patterson Construction office, once a model of efficient operation, transformed into something resembling a frat house. Ryan installed a ping-pong table and kegerator in the conference room, claiming it would boost creativity. Monday morning staff meetings were replaced with vision sessions where Ryan would ramble about his ideas for company expansion while his newly hired executives nodded enthusiastically. Meanwhile, actual construction projects floundered without proper oversight. The Green Building Division one had established, which accounted for nearly 30% of company revenue, was dismantled because Ryan found the certification requirements too complicated. Long-standing clients who had specifically sought out Patterson Construction for sustainable building options took their business elsewhere. Ryan's approach to winning new business was equally disastrous. He slashed bid prices to undercut competitors without understanding the actual costs involved. Patterson Construction began securing contracts that were guaranteed to operate at a loss before the first shovel hit dirt. When estimators tried to explain the problem, Ryan accused them of being negative and not seeing the big picture of growing market share. The company fleet, once maintained on a careful schedule, fell into disrepair as Ryan redirected the maintenance budget to lease a new Porsche as his client development vehicle. Equipment began breaking down on job sites, causing delays that triggered penalty clauses in contracts. Subcontractors who had worked with Patterson Construction for generations found themselves waiting 90 days for payment instead of the standard 30. Many refused to take on new Patterson projects, forcing Ryan to hire unknown subcontractors whose work quality was inconsistent at best. By the 9-month mark, the company's cash reserves, built up over decades of careful management, had been depleted. Ryan began using the company's line of credit to cover regular operating expenses, a cardinal sin in construction management. Interest payments alone were eating up thousands each month. My parents, who had planned to enjoy a comfortable retirement, found themselves increasingly drawn back into the business as problems multiplied. Dad would stop by job sites, wincing at obvious quality issues, but hesitant to undermine his son's authority. Mom started handling accounts payable again when vendors began calling the house demanding payment. Still, they made excuses for Ryan's performance. "He's still earning," Dad would tell concerned employees. "The market is challenging right now," Mom would explain to friends when they asked why Patterson trucks were disappearing from local job sites. The company's reputation, built over 3 generations, eroded rapidly. General contractors who had previously specified Patterson for their projects began looking elsewhere. The company's bonding capacity, its ability to secure the performance bonds required for larger projects, was downgraded due to financial instability, limiting the size of projects they could bid on. 12 months into Ryan's leadership, the first lawsuit arrived. A commercial client sued for substantial damages when structural issues emerged in a recently completed office building. Investigation revealed that Ryan had approved substituting lower-grade materials than those specified in the contract to save costs. The company's insurance carrier initially denied the claim, citing willful negligence. A second lawsuit followed when an apartment complex Patterson had built developed extensive water damage. The source was traced to improperly installed flashing, a basic construction element that any experienced project manager would have verified. The settlement depleted what remained of the company's cash reserves. Around the 15-month mark, Ryan made his most catastrophic decision. Without consulting financial advisors, he used the company's remaining borrowing capacity to purchase an adjacent property for a planned headquarters expansion. The timing couldn't have been worse. The commercial real estate market was at its peak, and he paid well above market value. Within 6 months, property values declined, leaving the company upside down on the loan. The personal spending continued unabated. Ryan bought a boat, then a vacation property in Florida. He took business development trips to Las Vegas and the Caribbean. Company credit cards were maxed out at high-end restaurants and luxury hotels. With the business hemorrhaging cash, Ryan began tapping into my parents' personal finances. First came short-term loans from their retirement accounts, then mortgaging the family home that had been paid off for years. Finally, liquidating investment accounts that had been intended to fund their retirement. By the 18-month mark, my parents' comfortable retirement had transformed into a financial nightmare. The company was operating at a significant monthly loss. Their personal savings were depleted. The family home, once a symbol of success, now had a mortgage with payments they couldn't afford. Dad, who had planned to spend his days golfing, was back on job sites at 68 years old, trying to salvage troubled projects. Through former colleagues, I heard that my father had aged 10 years and 18 months. His confident stride had become a worried shuffle. My mother had developed anxiety-related health issues, the stress manifesting physically in high blood pressure and insomnia. Ryan, meanwhile, remained in denial. He blamed the economy, disloyal employees, and demanding clients for the company's problems. He refused to acknowledge his role in the disaster, continuing to draw his executive salary, even as the company fell behind on payroll for regular employees. The final straw came when the bank called the company's line of credit due to multiple covenant violations. With no cash to pay it off and no assets left to pledge, Patterson Construction faced imminent bankruptcy. The business my grandfather had started from nothing, that my father had built into a regional powerhouse, and that I had helped modernize for the future, was weeks away from collapse. That's when my phone lit up with a text from my mother. "Mortgage is due. Can we talk?" The text from my mother arrived at 7:13 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Mortgage is due. Can we talk?" My first instinct was to ignore it. After all, I hadn't heard from her in nearly 2 years except for a generic Christmas card and birthday text. But curiosity got the better of me. What did mortgages due even mean? The family home had been paid off for over a decade. I responded with a single question mark. 3 disappeared immediately, then disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, we had to take out a mortgage to help the company. "We can't make this month's payment. I put my phone down and went about my morning routine. Coffee, shower, professional attire. The familiar rhythm helped me process this unexpected intrusion from my past. By the time I reached my office, 3 more texts had arrived. Please, Megan. We're in trouble. Ryan says it's temporary. Your father won't admit it, but we need help. I muted the conversation and focused on my day's appointments. I had a prospective client meeting, 2 project site visits, and a proposal to finalize. My business was thriving precisely because I maintained professional boundaries and focused on solutions rather than drama. My family's financial problems were not my emergency. But, as the day progressed, the texts continued. By afternoon, even my father had messaged, "We need to talk. Business matter." Coming from a man who had effectively disowned me from the family business, the irony was almost laughable. After my last meeting, I sat in my office overlooking the Chicago skyline and contemplated my options. I could continue ignoring them, which would be justifiable given our history. I could send money to cover the mortgage payment, which would enable their dysfunction without addressing the underlying issues. Or I could engage, but set clear boundaries. I decided on the third option, not out of family obligation, but professional curiosity. How bad had things actually gotten? I called my mother at exactly 5:30 p.m. She answered on the first ring. "Megan. Thank God. I've been waiting all day." "I had meetings," I said neutrally. "What's going on with the mortgage?" What followed was a 20-minute monologue of financial disaster. The house had been mortgaged to secure a business loan when the company's credit was downgraded. That loan had been used to cover losses on 3 major projects that Ryan had underbid. The monthly payment was $4,300, substantial for a couple whose retirement income had been decimated by Ryan's business loans from their personal accounts. "We're 3 months behind," Mom admitted. "The bank called yesterday. They're starting foreclosure proceedings next week if we don't catch up." "Where's Ryan in all this?" I asked. A pause. "He's trying his best," she said unconvincingly. "The market is challenging right now. Mom, I work in the same industry. The market is booming. Well-run construction companies can't hire fast enough to keep up with demand." Another pause, longer this time. "Your father would like to speak with you," she said finally, passing the phone. Dad's voice had aged, the once authoritative tone now wavering slightly. "Megan. Thank you for calling." "I'm listening," I said, neither hostile nor welcoming. He cleared his throat. "The situation at Patterson Construction has become complicated. We're facing some temporary cash flow issues that have affected our personal finances." "Define temporary and complicated," I replied. What emerged over the next hour was far worse than I had imagined. The company was essentially insolvent. Multiple lawsuits from clients and suppliers were pending. The bank had frozen their business accounts. Ryan had hired and fired 3 CFOs in 18 months, each one quitting when they realized the extent of the financial mismanagement. Employees hadn't received paychecks for 3 weeks. Tax liens had been filed for unpaid payroll taxes. "Where is Ryan now?" I asked. "He's in Florida," Dad admitted reluctantly. "At the condo. He says he's meeting with potential investors, but he trailed off." "But he's probably on his boat," I finished. Dad didn't confirm or deny. Instead, he got to the point. "We need your help, Megan." "Financial help?" I asked. "More than that," he said. "We need you to come back. To help us salvage what's left of the company." I nearly dropped the phone. After everything that had happened, after giving Ryan everything and me nothing, they wanted me to return and fix his mess? "You want me to rescue the company that you told me I didn't deserve to be part of?" The bitterness I thought I'd processed bubbled up unexpectedly. "I made a mistake," Dad said quietly. "We all did. But this isn't just about us anymore. There are 47 families depending on Patterson Construction for their livelihoods. People who did nothing wrong except trust our family to lead responsibly." He was playing the guilt card expertly, appealing to the sense of responsibility he had instilled in me. The worst part was, he wasn't wrong. Innocent employees were suffering because of my family's poor decisions. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "Come back as coup," he said. "Full authority to make whatever changes are necessary. Ryan will step back to a business development role only." "And my ownership stake?" A hesitation. "We could offer you 20% of the company." I laughed out loud. 20% of a company that's effectively bankrupt? That's your offer after I built a successful business from scratch while Ryan drove yours into the ground. 30%. Dad countered weakly. This call is over, I said. If you're serious about my help, have your lawyer draw up papers for 51% ownership, transferable to me immediately upon verification of the company's financial position. Otherwise, good luck with the foreclosure. Megan. Be reasonable, Dad started. I am being reasonable. You're asking me to leave a successful business I built to rescue one that you explicitly told me I didn't deserve to own. My terms are non-negotiable. I'll talk to your mother, he said finally. Do that. And while you're at it, talk to Ryan. Explain that his vacation is over. If I come back, he works under my direction or not at all. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet office, watching the Chicago lights come on as dusk fell. The conversation had left me shaken, not because of their predicament, but because of my response to it. 2 years ago, I would have immediately rushed to help regardless of the terms. I would have sacrificed my own interests to save the family business out of a misplaced sense of duty. Now, I understood my worth. I had built something valuable on my own terms. If my family wanted to access my skills and experience, they would have to acknowledge that value appropriately. No more giving everything and receiving nothing in return. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father is talking to the lawyer tomorrow. Please help us, Megan. We have nowhere else to turn. I left it unanswered. Their crisis had simmered for months. It could wait another day while I considered my options carefully. Whatever decision I made would be based on business logic, not emotional manipulation or family obligation. For the first time in our relationship, I had the leverage. The question was, what would I do with it? 3 days after the desperate call from my parents, I boarded a flight to Boston. In my briefcase were 2 documents prepared by my attorney, one for a consulting agreement, the other for a transfer of controlling interest in Patterson Construction. I had no idea which would be signed if either. I had rented a car rather than asking my parents to pick me up, maintaining the professional distance this situation required. The drive to their house, the house I grew up in, felt surreal. The property looked neglected, with overgrown landscaping and peeling paint on the trim. The Patterson Construction sign, near the driveway, was gone. My mother opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a tight hug that I didn't return. My father stood awkwardly in the entryway, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Ryan was noticeably absent. Where's Ryan? I asked after minimal pleasantries. He's coming, Dad said, checking his watch. He should be here soon. We moved to the living room where financial documents were spread across the coffee table, bank statements, legal notices, tax forms, the physical evidence of their financial collapse. Before we begin, I said, I need to understand exactly what I'm walking into. I want to see everything. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, lawsuits, tax notices, everything. For the next 2 hours, my parents walked me through the disaster. The company had over $3,700,000 in debt, with virtually no assets remaining. Suppliers were refusing deliveries without upfront payment. 3 major clients had terminated contracts due to delays and quality issues. The family home had a $780,000 mortgage with no payments made in 4 months. Where did all the money go? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Dad hesitated, but Mom spoke up. Ryan made some questionable decisions. As if on cue, the front door opened, and Ryan strolled in. He was tanned from his Florida business trip, designer sunglasses perched on his head. He stopped short when he saw me. Family reunion? He said, with forced casualness. Nobody told me Megan was coming. Sit down, Ryan, I said. We're discussing how you destroyed a 3-generation family business in less than 2 years. His face flushed. That's not fair. The market conditions. Save it. I interrupted. I've seen the numbers. This has nothing to do with market conditions and everything to do with incompetence and embezzlement. Embezzlement? That's a serious accusation, he blustered. I pulled out a document from my briefcase, a spreadsheet I had prepared analyzing his personal expenditures charged to the company. Country club memberships, first-class flights, the boat, the Florida condo. All purchased with company funds, while projects were failing and employees weren't being paid. Ryan looked to our father for support, but Dad stared at the floor. I was entitled to compensation as CEO, Ryan tried. Not when the company is insolvent, I countered. That's textbook fraudulent conveyance, possibly criminal depending on how the funds were documented. The color drained from his face. For perhaps the first time in his life, Ryan realized he couldn't charm or bluster his way out of a situation. "I've reviewed everything," I said, addressing my parents while ignoring Ryan. "There are two options on the table. Option 1. I come in as a consultant, charging my standard rates to develop a restructuring plan that you implement. Option 2. I take controlling interest in the company, 51%, and full authority to execute whatever changes I deem necessary." "This is ridiculous," Ryan interjected. "You can't just waltz in and take control of my company." "Your company?" I raised an eyebrow. "The company you ran into the ground? The company that's weeks away from bankruptcy?" "That company." "Megan is right," Dad said quietly. We all turned to him in surprise. "We gave you every advantage, Ryan. Resources, opportunities, authority, and you squandered all of it." It was the first time I'd ever heard my father criticize Ryan directly. The shock silenced even Ryan. "We'll take option 2, Dad continued. "Full control to Megan." Ryan started to protest, but Dad held up his hand. "It's done, Ryan. If you want any hope of salvaging your reputation or staying out of legal trouble, you'll cooperate fully with whatever Megan decides." My mother nodded in agreement, tears in her eyes. I pushed the ownership transfer documents across the table and my parents signed without further discussion. Just like that, I became the majority owner of Patterson Construction. "Now what?" Ryan asked sullenly. "Now the real work begins," I replied. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. at the office. Everyone, including you, Ryan." The next morning, I arrived at Patterson Construction headquarters at 6:30 a.m. The building that had once been a source of family pride looked shabby and neglected. Inside was worse: disorganized paperwork, outdated computers, empty desks where longtime employees had once sat. My parents arrived at 6:50, Ryan at 7:20 with a coffee in hand and no apology for his tardiness. I gathered them in the conference room, now devoid of the ping-pong table but still bearing scuff marks on the walls. "Here's how this works," I began. "This is a rescue operation, not a family reunion. I'll make decisions based on what's best for the company's survival, not anyone's feelings or expectations. Anyone who can't accept that should leave now." No one moved. "Good. First order of business, Ryan. You're removed from all operational and financial responsibilities, effective immediately. You'll work exclusively in client relations under my direct supervision. Your salary is reduced to match other department heads. Company credit cards canceled. Company car returned. Florida condo sold." Ryan started to protest, but Dad placed a warning hand on his arm. He subsided, glaring at me. "Mom and Dad, you'll serve in advisory capacities only. You have institutional knowledge that's valuable but no decision-making authority. Your retirement benefits are suspended until the company is profitable again." My mother nodded. My father looked pained but didn't object. "I've contacted key former employees who were terminated or quit under Ryan's leadership. 7 have agreed to return, including Martin Chen and Dolores Rodriguez, who will resume their previous roles in estimating and office management." I outlined the rest of my restructuring plan: renegotiating with creditors, meeting personally with dissatisfied clients, implementing strict financial controls, and selling non-essential assets to generate operating capital. I made it clear that the recovery would be painful and required sacrifices from everyone. Over the next 3 months, I split my time between Chicago, where my assistant managed ongoing Patterson consulting projects, and Boston, where I implemented the rescue plan. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I made difficult decisions, including laying off Ryan's fraternity brothers and terminating expensive office leases. The turnaround wasn't immediate, but progress came steadily. We negotiated payment plans with suppliers who respected my reputation in the industry. 2 major clients agreed to reinstate contracts with revised timelines after I personally guaranteed quality oversight. The bank restructured loans based on our realistic recovery plan. Ryan, to my surprise, proved somewhat useful once limited to client relations only. Stripped of financial authority but still able to charm potential clients, he secured several small but profitable projects that helped stabilize cash flow. He seemed humbled by the experience of nearly losing everything, though I remained cautious about his newfound responsibility. 6 months into the rescue operation, Patterson Construction was stable, not thriving, but no longer at imminent risk of collapse. I had established systems and training that allowed me to scale back my direct involvement. My parents had downsized to a smaller home, using the proceeds from selling their overmortgaged property to eliminate personal debt. As for me, I maintained majority ownership, but hired an experienced construction executive to handle day-to-day operations in Boston, while I returned to my Chicago business full-time. I had proven what I needed to prove, to my family and to myself. The most significant change wasn't in the company's financial statements, but in my family's dynamics. My father, who had once dismissed my contributions, now consulted me on every major decision. My mother, who had enabled years of favoritism, apologized tearfully during a private dinner. Even Ryan acknowledged, albeit reluctantly, that the company would have disappeared without my intervention. But the most important transformation was internal. I no longer needed their approval or recognition to validate my worth. I had built a successful business on my own terms, then rescued the family company on my terms. My sense of value came from within, not from external validation. A year after that desperate text about the mortgage, I received another message from my mother. The company showed a profit this quarter. Thank you for saving our legacy. I smiled at the message but didn't immediately reply. Instead, I looked around my Chicago office, at the business I had built from nothing, at the team I had assembled based on merit rather than nepotism. This was my legacy. Not a name on a building or a company passed down through generations, but the knowledge that I had created something valuable through my own efforts. Later that evening, I finally replied to my mother. It was never about the legacy. It was about recognizing worth where it exists, not where tradition dictates it should be. I'm glad you finally see that. The journey from being the overlooked daughter to the company's savior taught me lessons no business school could provide. That sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover your true value. That standing firm in your worth isn't selfish, it's necessary. And, most importantly, that the opinions of others, even family, don't define your capabilities or potential. So, what about you? Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who should have recognized it all along? Have you had to create boundaries with family to protect your self-respect? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned the hard way. Remember, sometimes the people who should support you the most are the ones who see your value least, until you show them exactly what they stand to lose. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you in the next video.